Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I punched my own brother in the face, tackled him to the ground, and called the cops because my daughter told me he had hurt her. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask questions. I just reacted. 3 years later, my brother still refuses to speak to my daughter, even though the truth came out. Now, he won't come to her 16th birthday, and she's heartbroken. But I don't know if I can blame him. That night started like any other. It was a quiet evening, the kind where nothing seems out of place, where the world feels safe. My wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, and my daughter, Lily, had just gone to her room. My younger brother, Jake, was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. If I had known what was coming, maybe I would have handled things differently. Maybe I would have taken a breath, asked a question, anything other than what I did. But I didn't. Because when your child comes to you, shaking, crying, and tells you someone has hurt them, there is no pause. There is no thinking. There is only rage. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. They were fast, uneven, like she was running, but barely able to keep herself upright. Then she was in front of me, eyes wide with terror, her whole body trembling. "Dad," she gasped, then broke into sobs so violent I had to grab her shoulders just to keep her steady. My heart pounded in my chest. "Lily, what's wrong?" I demanded, already feeling a sick sense of dread creeping up my spine. She tried to talk, but the words kept catching in her throat. I rubbed her back, shushing her, forcing myself to stay calm. "It's okay, baby. Just tell me." Finally, between gasping breaths, she choked out the words that changed everything. "Uncle Jakey," he touched me. The world tilted. The words didn't make sense, not at first. My brain rejected them, but my body reacted instantly. My hands clenched, my vision narrowed, and before I even realized what I was doing, I was moving. "Lily, stay here," I ordered, barely recognizing my own voice. She tried to grab my arm. "Dad, wait." But I was already walking, already seeing red. Jake was still sitting on the couch, looking completely at ease. That made me sick. He was sitting there like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just shattered my daughter. I didn't give him a chance to speak. I swung. The first punch cracked against his jaw with a force that sent him sprawling onto the floor. A choked sound of shock escaped him, his phone flying from his hand. "What the hell?" he shouted, scrambling to sit up, but I was already on him. "You sick son of a b asterisk 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 asterisk." I roared, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him back down. His head hit the carpet with a dull thud. He fought back, shoving in my arms, but I was bigger, angrier. "Adam, stop." Sarah's voice cut through the air, but I ignored her. "What did you do to her?" I spat, my fist raised again. Jake's eyes darted around in confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Lily told me everything," I growled. "She told me what you did." His face twisted, first in confusion, then something like fear. But I wasn't in the mood for his games. I pressed my forearm against his throat, pinning him down. "You're gonna rot in prison," I hissed. I fumbled for my phone with my free hand, dialing 911, my breathing ragged. "I need the cops in my house," I said when the operator answered. "My brother. He hurt my daughter." "Adam." Jake started, but I pressed harder. "Shut up." Sarah was crying now. "Please, let him go. You don't even know." "I know enough." "You snipped a hip." Jake was still fighting, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I don't know what's happening. Save it for the cops," I spat. Minutes later, sirens screamed outside. The officers burst in, guns drawn, shouting commands. I lifted my hands, breathing hard, as they pried me off Jake. His face was red, his lips split, eyes burning with something between rage and betrayal. They cuffed him. I watched, my chest heaving, as they pulled him to his feet. "This is a mistake," he kept saying, his voice raw. "I didn't do anything." But I wasn't listening. All I saw was my daughter's tear-streaked face. I had done what any father would do. I had protected my little girl. As they led Jake out the door, I felt a dark, bitter satisfaction. I had done the right thing. Or at least, that's what I thought. For now. The hours after Jake was arrested were a blur of adrenaline, rage, and a grim sense of justice. I barely registered the officers' questions after they hauled him out of my house, barely heard Sarah sobbing in the kitchen. My mind was fixed on Lily, on her shaking form curled up on the couch, knees hugged to her chest, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. She was broken, and I had done what any father would do. I spent the night pacing the living room, waiting for an update from the station. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from my parents, from my older sister, even from Jake himself. I ignored every single one. I knew what they were going to say. They were going to tell me I had overreacted, that I had jumped to conclusions. But they hadn't seen Lily's face. They hadn't heard her voice tremble when she told me what happened. By morning, the real chaos started. The police called me in to give an official statement. I was still furious, still ready to tear Jake apart all over again if I had to. But the moment I stepped into that station, something shifted. The energy in the room wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the determined pursuit of justice. It was something murkier. The detective handling the case, a gruff man in his 50s with tired eyes, asked me to sit down. Adam, he started, his voice calm but firm. We need to clarify a few things about your brother's arrest. There's nothing to clarify, I said, crossing my arms. My daughter told me what happened. Lily is in the next room. Speaking with one of our child interview specialists, he interrupted. And there are some inconsistencies. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? The detective sighed, rubbing his temples. Your daughter is emotional, which is understandable. But she's struggling to give a clear timeline of what happened. Her initial story was vague. And now, before he could finish, a sharp cry echoed through the hallway. Lily. My heart lurched as I shot to my feet, but the detective held up a hand. Let them talk to her, he said. I think you need to hear this. The next 5 minutes felt like an eternity. I stood in silence, fists clenched, while the detective listened through an earpiece to what was happening in the next room. His face changed subtly at first, then more noticeably. His brows furrowed, his lips pressed into a tight line. Then, he looked at me. You should sit down, Adam. I didn't want to. I wanted to barge into that room, hold my daughter, protect her from whatever was upsetting her. But my legs felt weak as I sank back into the chair. Lily made a mistake, the detective said carefully. She's realizing it now, but she's scared. A slow, creeping dread unfurled in my chest. What do you mean a mistake? He clicked his pen against the table, choosing his words. She's saying she was confused. That last night, Jake grabbed her arm, but only to stop her from falling. The words didn't make sense. They didn't fit into the narrative that had been playing in my mind for the past 12 hours. That's not. I started, but my voice faltered. The detective leaned forward. Adam, I think Lily panicked. I think she misunderstood what happened, and in that panic, she told you something that wasn't true. The ground beneath me felt unsteady. My ears rang. No, I muttered, shaking my head. No, she wouldn't. The door to the interrogation room opened, and Lily emerged, her face streaked with tears. Her small frame shook violently, her hands clutching at the sleeves of her hoodie. Daddy, she whimpered. I rushed to her, dropping to my knees, my hands gripping her arms. Lily, what's going on? What did they say to you? She sobbed harder, her face crumpling. I thought he. She gasped for air, her whole body trembling. But he didn't. He just grabbed my arm so I wouldn't fall. For a moment, everything around me disappeared. The station, the detective, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. It was just me and my daughter, her fragile confession hanging in the air like a noose around my neck. I had attacked my own brother over a misunderstanding. Jake had spent the night in a jail cell because of me. Lily, I whispered, my voice barely there. Are you sure? She nodded frantically, her face filled with pure, unfiltered guilt. I didn't mean to, Daddy. I was scared. I thought. She broke down into another fit of sobs. The detective gave me a moment before clearing his throat. We're going to release Jake immediately. But Adam, this is bad. I swallowed, my throat dry as sandpaper. You didn't just accuse him, he continued. You assaulted him. You called the cops. You told them he was a predator. That's not something you come back from easily. I could barely breathe. Jake was innocent. I had told the world he was a monster. And now, I had to face the consequences. The ride home was silent except for Lily's quiet sniffling. Sarah's hands trembled on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? By the time we pulled into the driveway, a car was already waiting. My parents. My mother stepped out first, her eyes red-rimmed, her expression twisted with worry and fury. My father was next, his jaw set in a way that told me I was about to get torn apart. Then, the passenger door of the car opened, and Jake stepped out. His lip was still swollen, a deep bruise forming along his jaw where I had hit him. He moved stiffly, his hands clenched at his sides. When his gaze landed on me, it was like staring into a stranger's eyes. Cold, distant. For the first time in my life, I saw hatred in my brother's face. And I knew, in that moment, that I hadn't just broken his trust. I had destroyed it. The moment Jake stepped out of the car, I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. His face was still bruised from my fists, his lips still slightly swollen, but it wasn't the physical damage that made my breath hitch. It was the way he looked at me. Like I was a stranger. Like I was nothing. I took a step forward, but he didn't move. He just stood there, staring, his arms rigid at his sides. My mother wiped her eyes with shaking hands, her voice cracking as she said, "Fix this. Fix this." Like it was that simple. I swallowed hard, forcing down the knot in my throat. "Jake, I don't," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through steel. "Don't you dare. Please, just let them put me in jail, Adam." His voice was eerily calm, but his eyes burned with something raw and violent. "Do you get that? Do you even understand what you did?" I opened my mouth, then shut it, because what was I supposed to say? That I hadn't been thinking? That I had acted on instinct? That I had done what any father would do? I wanted to tell him all of it. I wanted him to understand. But the way he was looking at me told me he never would. "You didn't even ask," he continued, voice thick with exhaustion. "You just decided I was a monster and attacked me like some rabid animal. You let them handcuff me. You let them throw me in a cell. Adam," his hands curled into fists. "Do you have any idea what that felt like? Even for one night?" I did, because now I was in my own kind of prison. "Jake, I swear to you I thought." "You thought wrong," he spat. Behind me, Lily let out a small, broken whimper. "Uncle Jake," she whispered, taking a tiny step toward him. I didn't mean," but before she could finish, Jake turned away. He turned away from her. And somehow, that hurt worse than the things he had said to me. My mother sobbed into my father's chest, his hand resting on her shoulder. But he said nothing. He didn't defend me. Didn't tell Jake he was being unreasonable. He just watched in silence as my little brother got back into the car without another word. The slam of the door made Lily flinch. And then he was gone. I tried. I really did. In the first few weeks, I called him almost every day. Sometimes he ignored me completely. Other times, he picked up just long enough to say something like, "Don't call me again." I went to his apartment. Knocked. Waited. Sometimes, I could hear him moving inside, but he never opened the door. My parents weren't much better. My mother cried constantly, blaming me for tearing the family apart. My father spoke in short, clipped sentences whenever I called. There were no more warm greetings, no more casual conversations. Everything had changed. Sarah kept telling me to give Jake time. "He's hurt," she said softly. "He'll come around." But weeks turned into months, then a year, and Jake didn't come around. He stopped showing up to family gatherings. At first, he made excuses, but after a while, he didn't even bother. My mother tried to drag him to Thanksgiving, but the second she mentioned Lily would be there, his voice turned to ice. "Then I won't be." That was the moment I realized he wasn't just angry at me. He was angry at her. Lily blamed herself. I saw it in the way she carried herself, in the way she barely spoke whenever Jake's name came up. She tried reaching out to him, just like I did. She sent texts, wrote a long letter that she folded neatly into an envelope and handed to my mother to deliver. But weeks passed, and she never got a response. Eventually, she stopped trying, and I don't think I'd ever seen my daughter so defeated. 2 years passed before I finally saw Jake in person again. It wasn't planned. It wasn't some heartfelt reunion. It was an accident, one that happened in the worst way possible. I was at the grocery store, grabbing some last-minute things for dinner, when I turned the corner, and there he was. For a moment, neither of us moved. He looked different, harder, colder. The stubble on his jaw was thicker, his eyes distant, as if he was already preparing to turn and walk away. But I wasn't going to let him. Not this time. "Jake," I said, stepping closer. "Please just talk to me." His lips twitched, like he was fighting back a bitter laugh. "Why?" "Because it's been 2 years," I said, my voice tight. "Because we're family." Jake exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No, Adam. We were family. Before you decided I was a predator. Before you ruined my life. You have every right to be angry," I said. "But, angry?" He finally laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Adam, I lost everything. You don't get that, do you? You moved on. You got to go back to your perfect little life with your wife and daughter. But me?" He gestured vaguely at himself. "You think I got to go back to normal?" I frowned. "Jake, what are you talking about?" He scoffed. "You really don't know, do you?" And then he told me about how his boss had found out about the accusation. How, even after the police cleared him, people still whispered, still wondered. His girlfriend at the time? She left him. Friends started pulling away, uncertain, unsure. It didn't matter that it wasn't true, he said bitterly. It was enough that it was said at all. My chest felt tight. I had done this. You think I blame Lily? He asked. I don't. She was scared. She was 13. But I'll never forget that it was you who made the call. You who looked at me and saw a monster before you even heard the whole story. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I had just been protecting my daughter, that I had reacted because I thought I was doing the right thing. But I couldn't, because the truth was I had never given him a chance. I swallowed hard. Jake, if I could take it back, I would. Yeah, he murmured, grabbing his basket and stepping past me. Me too. I turned, watching as he walked away. I thought about stopping him. I thought about begging. But how do you fix something that's already broken beyond repair? The change in Lily wasn't immediate. At first, she was just confused. She didn't understand the weight of what had happened. How something she had said in a moment of fear had shattered a life. She was still just a kid, after all. 13, on the edge of adolescence, still living in a world where parents could fix things, where apologies were enough, where mistakes could be undone with the right words. But as time passed, and Jake never came back, it started to sink in. She would ask about him constantly at first. Has Uncle Jake called? Did he say anything to Grandma? Can I write him a letter? The hope in her voice was heartbreaking, this naive belief that if she just explained herself, if she just said the right thing, he would forgive her. But he never answered her, never called, never showed up at family gatherings. And little by little, that hope in her eyes faded. One night, about a year after it all happened, I found her sitting on the floor of her room, surrounded by crumpled pieces of paper. Her head was bowed, her shoulders shaking, and as I stepped inside, I saw the tears streaming down her face. Hey, I said softly, crouching beside her. What's wrong, sweetheart? She didn't answer right away, just sniffled and wiped at her face. Then, after a long silence, she whispered, I ruined his life, didn't I? The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that she had just been scared, that she had made a mistake like any kid would. But deep down, I knew what she already did. Jake had lost everything because of that night. I sat beside her, staring at the half-written letter in her lap. The ink was smudged from her tears, her handwriting uneven from how hard she had been gripping the pen. Uncle Jake, I know you hate me, but I just want to say I'm sorry. My throat felt tight. Lily, she turned to look at me then, her big, grief-stricken eyes searching mine for something, anything, that could make this better. But it's true, isn't it? She pressed. He lost his job because of me. His girlfriend broke up with him. He had to move. And her voice cracked. He won't even look at me, Dad. He won't even let me say I'm sorry. I ran a hand down my face, exhaling slowly. Lily, you didn't do it on purpose. But that doesn't change what happened. She let out a choked sob. I thought he was hurting me, and I was wrong. And now he's paying for it forever. I wanted to tell her that wasn't true. That time would fix it. That Jake would eventually forgive her. But would he? For the past year, he had barely even acknowledged me. And when he did, it was with the same cold, exhausted stare. I couldn't even imagine what he must have been feeling toward her. Lily sucked in a sharp breath, looking down at her letter again. I keep writing to him, she whispered, but he never answers. I send texts, and they all say delivered, but he never reads them. He won't even block me. She shook her head. He just ignores me like I don't exist. I swallowed hard. Maybe he just needs more time. She let out a bitter laugh, a sound no 15-year-old should ever make. How much time, Dad? Another year? 5? Forever? I didn't know what to say, because the truth was I didn't know the answer. The weight of Lily's guilt became a shadow over our home. She didn't talk about it much, but it was always there, lingering in the way she withdrew, the way she avoided family gatherings because she didn't want to hear another story about how Jake was doing well, but never with us. I saw it in the way she hesitated whenever she heard his name, in the way her fingers would hover over her phone, like she was about to text him but stopped herself every time. She tried, though. God, she tried. On her 14th birthday, she told me all she wanted was for Jake to come. I don't even care if he talks to me, she said. I just want to know he still thinks of me as his niece. So I called him. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. I left a message, told him that Lily wanted him there, that she just wanted a chance to see him again, that she missed him. He never called back. Lily didn't cry when I told her. She just nodded, went upstairs, and shut her door. But that was the first year she didn't make a wish when she blew out her candles. As she got older, it got worse. The weight of what she had done settled deep inside her, turning into something I didn't know how to fix. She started isolating herself, pulling away from friends. Her grades slipped. She stopped playing piano, something she had loved since she was a kid. One night, when she was 15, I caught her scrolling through old pictures on her phone. Photos of her and Jake, back when things were normal. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, silly selfies she had taken when he wasn't looking. She didn't notice me at first, too lost in whatever memories were playing in her head. Then, in the smallest voice, she whispered, "I miss him." My chest ached. "I know, sweetheart." She looked up at me, her face full of pain. "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" I wanted to say yes. I needed to say yes. But I couldn't, because I didn't know. One night, she left a final voicemail. "Hey, Uncle Jake. I guess you're not going to answer, but I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. Again, I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I messed up, but I swear to you, if I could take it back, I would. I miss you. I miss how things used to be. And I wish you'd talk to me." She never tried calling him again after that. And I think that was the night she gave up hope. Lily's 16th birthday was supposed to be a fresh start. A turning point. After years of watching her carry the weight of guilt, after all the nights she spent crying in silence, after every unanswered text and ignored letter, I hoped, that maybe this year would be different. She wasn't the same scared 13-year-old anymore. She had grown, matured, and even though the pain still lingered in her eyes, she had started pushing forward, trying to live with the reality that her mistake had cost her the uncle she once adored. But she hadn't given up completely. Not yet. I saw it in the way she hesitated before writing out her birthday guest list. The way she chewed her lip, glancing at me from across the table. "Do you think?" She trailed off, staring at the paper, gripping the pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Do I think what?" I asked, though I already knew. She swallowed hard. "Do you think Uncle Jake would come?" I wanted to tell her yes. God, I wanted to tell her that time had healed him, that he had forgiven her, that he would walk through the door on her birthday with that same easy smile he used to have. But I didn't want to lie to her. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can call him." She nodded, biting her lip. "Yeah, okay, call him." I waited until the next day, standing outside on the porch with my phone clutched in my hand. I took a deep breath before dialing. The line rang 3 times before he picked up. There was no hello, no greeting at all. Just a curt, tired, "What do you want, Adam?" I hesitated. Even after 3 years, he still sounded distant. Like I was nothing more than a ghost from a past he wanted to forget. "Lily's birthday is coming up," I finally said. "She wants you there." Silence. Then a sharp exhale. "I'm not coming." I gripped the railing, frustration tightening my chest. "Jake, it's been 3 years." "And?" His voice was sharp, almost bored, like he had already decided this conversation wasn't worth his time. "She was a kid," Jake, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "She made a mistake." "You don't think she's suffered enough?" "She didn't go to jail, Adam," he snapped. "She didn't have her whole life turned upside down. She didn't lose her job, her friends, her reputation. She didn't have to live with the looks, the whispers." I flinched. He had never talked about this before. Not in detail. But now, the words came tumbling out, bitter and sharp. "Do you know what it's like to be in a grocery store and have some stranger's eyes linger on you, like they're trying to remember where they know you from? To see it click in their head, to see that flash of recognition and the slight hesitation, like they're wondering if they should be afraid of you? Do you know what it's like to have people who used to be your friends suddenly keep their distance, even though they know the charges were dropped? Even though they know I was innocent?" "Jake, she didn't mean to, but it still happened," he said coldly. "And I still live with it." I squeezed my eyes shut. "So what? You're just never going to see her again?" Silence again. Then, finally, "I don't know." My breath caught. It wasn't a hard no. It wasn't the same sharp rejection I had grown used to. It was something else, and I clung to it. "Just think about it," I pleaded. "Please. She misses you. She loves you. And all she wants for her birthday is to see you again." He didn't answer. And then the line went dead. When I told Lily, she didn't cry. She just nodded, staring down at her hands, her shoulders slumping. I figured she murmured. I sat down beside her. "He didn't say no, sweetheart. He didn't say yes either," she said softly. I didn't know what to say to that. The day of her birthday, she put on a brave face. She smiled as her friends arrived, laughed at their jokes, let Sarah fuss over her decorations. But every so often, I saw her glance at the door, waiting, hoping. By the time we cut the cake, the hope in her eyes was gone. He wasn't coming. He was never coming. That night, after the guests had left, she sat at the kitchen table, poking at a piece of cake with her fork. "He really does hate me," she said, her voice hollow. I hated that she believed that. I hated that she had spent the last 3 years punishing herself, drowning in guilt that she could never get rid of. I wanted to tell her it wasn't true, that Jake didn't hate her, that deep down, he missed her too. But I wasn't sure if that was a lie. Because maybe, just maybe, he really had decided that she wasn't worth forgiving. And I didn't know how to fix that. Lily barely spoke for days after her birthday. At first, I thought she was just tired, drained from the emotional toll of waiting for an uncle who would never come. But as the silence stretched on, I realized it was deeper than that. Something inside her had broken. She didn't just look sad. She looked defeated. She stopped texting her friends as much. Stopped laughing at the dumb jokes I made at the dinner table. Stopped playing music in her room. The house felt quieter, emptier, like a part of her had just faded away. One night, I heard her crying through the walls. Soft, muffled sobs. The kind she was trying to hide. I knocked gently on her door. "Lily?" No answer. I sighed and leaned against the frame. "I know you're awake." Still nothing. I hesitated, then slowly slid down to sit on the floor outside her room, my back pressed against the wood. "You know," I said, keeping my voice light, "when you were little, you used to lock yourself in here whenever you got mad at me. Usually over something dumb, like me not letting you eat ice cream before dinner." A pause. Then a quiet, choked laugh. I smiled. "And I'd sit right here, just like this, waiting for you to forgive me. Most of the time, I'd end up falling asleep, and your mom would have to drag me to bed." Silence again. But this time, I felt like she was listening. I ran a hand down my face. "I hate seeing you like this, Lily. I hate that you're carrying this all on your own." The door didn't open, but her voice came through, small and broken. "He's never going to forgive me, is he?" I shut my eyes, exhaling slowly. "I don't know." A shaky breath. "I don't think I can live with that." Something in my chest twisted painfully. I wanted to tell her it wasn't true. That time would heal everything. That one day, Jake would walk through our front door, and everything would go back to how it used to be. But 3 years had passed, and he hadn't budged. So instead, I whispered, "You're not alone in this, sweetheart." I don't know if she believed me. Sarah didn't think I should push Jake. "He has a right to his feelings," she said that night as we got ready for bed. "You can't force him to forgive her, Adam." "I know that," I muttered, pulling off my shirt and tossing it into the laundry bin. "But I can't just do nothing." She let out a sigh. "And what exactly do you think you're going to accomplish by showing up at his apartment? You think if you just talk to him, he'll suddenly forgive everything?" I didn't answer, because, honestly, I didn't know what I was expecting. I just knew that watching my daughter suffer in silence was killing me. Sarah studied me for a moment, then softened. "I know you want to fix this," she said gently. "But maybe some things can't be fixed." I clenched my jaw. "I don't accept that." She exhaled through her nose, rubbing her temples. "You never do." I grabbed my keys. "Adam," she warned. "I won't start a fight, I promised. I just need to see him, to talk to him, to at least try." She didn't stop me, but she didn't tell me to be careful, either. I hadn't been to Jake's apartment in over a year. I used to drop by when everything first happened, knocking on his door, waiting for him to open it. He never did. This time, I wasn't leaving until he did. It was late. The parking lot was nearly empty, the hum of the city muffled by the quiet night air. I knocked 3 times, stepping back and shoving my hands into my pockets. A long silence. Then, finally, footsteps. The door swung open, and Jake stood there, his face hard, his eyes cold. "What the hell are you doing here?" I swallowed. "Can we talk?" His jaw clenched. "There's nothing left to talk about." "Jake, go home, Adam." I took a step forward. "Not until you hear me out." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You don't give up, do you?" "Not when it comes to family," I shot back. Something flickered in his eyes. Maybe anger. Maybe something else. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Fine." He stepped aside, gesturing inside. "You've got 5 minutes." His apartment was smaller than I expected. Clean, but empty, like he hadn't bothered to make it feel like home. I sat down on the couch while he leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching me warily. "So?" he said. "Say whatever you came to say." I hesitated. "Then Lily's not okay." His expression didn't change. "Not my problem." I gritted my teeth. "It should be." "Why?" He snapped. "Because she finally realized what she did? Because she finally feels bad about it?" "Because she's your niece," I said. "And she loves you. And she spent the last 3 years punishing herself for something she never meant to do." He let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening against his biceps. "Jake," I continued, my voice softer now. "She was 13. A scared little girl who thought something happened when it didn't. She's not some evil mastermind who wanted to hurt you." He flinched. I saw it. He didn't want to hear this. He wanted to keep hating her. Hating me? But I wasn't leaving until I got through to him. You don't have to forgive me, I said. Hell, I don't even expect you to. But Lily? She's just a kid, Jake. And she's going to carry this with her for the rest of her life. He was silent for a long time. Then, finally, he whispered, so will I. I swallowed the lump in my throat. So what now? He looked up at me. His eyes weren't cold anymore. Just tired. I don't know, he admitted. For the first time in 3 years, I felt hope. Because maybe, just maybe, I don't know, was better than never. Jake stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face twisted in frustration the moment he saw me. I had barely knocked before he yanked the door open, eyes already filled with irritation, as if he had expected me to show up and had been dreading it. What do you want, Adam? He asked flatly, already exasperated. I didn't hesitate. I want my daughter to have her uncle back. His expression barely shifted. If anything, his jaw just clenched tighter. I took a step forward, planting my feet like I was bracing for impact. She's 16, Jake. She's been drowning in guilt for 3 years. Can't you just try? His lips parted like he wanted to say something, but he stopped himself, shaking his head instead. Try? He repeated bitterly. You want me to just pretend it didn't happen? That she didn't say what she said? That I didn't go to jail because of it? I'm not asking you to pretend. My voice was even steady. I'm asking you to see her. To talk to her. He let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. And then what? Huh? His voice rose, frustration spilling out. What do you expect me to do, Adam? Hug her? Tell her it's all okay? You think I can just smile and act like my life wasn't nearly destroyed? I didn't flinch. I had expected this reaction. I had braced for it. But I wasn't backing down. You don't have to act like it's okay, I said quietly. But you can at least give her a chance to apologize. His nostrils flared. She already apologized. Not in person. His shoulders were stiff, his hands curled into fists. I don't need an apology. Then what do you need? I demanded. Because I see you, Jake. You're still angry. You're still carrying this like it's a damn anchor around your neck. His glare sharpened. You don't get to tell me how to feel. I don't want to tell you how to feel, I shot back. I just don't want you to waste the rest of your life hating a kid who made a mistake. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, slowly, his face twisted into something between exhaustion and disbelief. You still don't get it, do you? He muttered. You still don't understand what it was like for me. My jaw tightened. Then tell me. He stared at me, breathing heavily, his eyes flickering with something I hadn't seen before, something raw. You want to know what it was like? He asked, voice low and sharp. Fine. Let me spell it out for you. Jake stepped back from the doorway, gesturing inside. Come in. You want the truth? Sit your ass down, and I'll give it to you. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before following him inside. His apartment was small, but meticulously clean. Almost too clean, like it was more of a place to exist rather than live. No photos. No personal touches. Just a couch, a TV, and a kitchen table with exactly one chair. I sat down on the couch, and he stayed standing, arms crossed over his chest like he needed a physical barrier between us. Then, finally, he started talking. You think I'm mad because of what happened that night? He asked. Because you hit me? Because I got arrested? I stayed quiet, letting him speak. That was only the beginning, Adam, he said bitterly. That was just the first step in my entire life falling apart. He took a slow breath, staring at the floor. You remember my old boss, Mr. Carson? I nodded, my stomach twisting. The day after I got out, he called me into his office, Jake said. Told me he understood the situation, but that having someone with an accusation like that hanging over them wasn't good for the company. He scoffed. Didn't matter that the cops cleared me. Didn't matter that nothing happened. He still fired me. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. After that, it got worse, he continued. Friends started pulling away. Some of them didn't say anything, just stopped inviting me places. Others flat out told me they didn't feel comfortable being around me anymore. His voice was eerily calm, like he was detached from the memories. But I could see it in his face, the way his eyes darkened, the way his jaw kept tightening. Then there was my girlfriend, he said. We had been together for 2 years, Adam. 2 years. And you know what she said when I tried to explain? I shook my head, dread pooling in my stomach. She said, I believe you, Jake. I really do. But this is just too much. He let out a bitter laugh. And that was it. She was gone. I had no words. I had known Jake had suffered because of what happened. But hearing it all laid out like this, it was like watching a car crash in slow motion. And you want to know the worst part? He asked, finally looking at me. Even after all that, people still whisper, still wonder. It didn't matter that I was innocent. The fact that it was even said was enough to ruin me. Guilt clawed at my chest. Jake, I said quietly, I swear to you, I never meant. I know, he interrupted. I know you didn't mean to ruin my life, but that doesn't change the fact that you did. I swallowed hard. I don't blame Lily for being scared, he admitted. But I'll never forget what happened because of it. I exhaled slowly, choosing my words carefully. She's not asking you to forget, I said. She's just asking you to see her, to talk to her, to stop treating her like she doesn't exist. He rubbed a hand down his face, looking more tired than angry now. You don't have to forgive her, I said. But I think you need to decide if you're going to let this define the rest of your life. Silence. For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me to get the hell out. But then, finally he spoke. Give me some time to think. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. And, right now, that was the best I could hope for. Jake leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, his jaw tight. His apartment felt cold. Not in temperature, but in the way it lacked warmth, lacked any sign of a life that felt truly lived in. No pictures on the walls, no signs of friends or family ever visiting. Just a couch, a TV, and a small kitchen table with a single chair. He finally exhaled through his nose, rubbing the back of his neck like he was debating whether or not to speak. Then, after a long silence, he pushed himself off the counter and sat down across from me. You want to know why I haven't forgiven her? He asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of the anger I was so used to hearing. I nodded, bracing myself. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. Because even after the truth came out, even after I was cleared, people never really forgot. I frowned, but I didn't interrupt. You think it was just one night in jail? He scoffed. That the second they let me out, everything went back to normal? He shook his head. That's not how it works, Adam. Not with something like this. I shifted in my seat, guilt clawing at my chest. I know it was hard. You don't know, he cut me off, his eyes flashing with something dark and raw. You have no idea what it's like to be treated like a predator when you're innocent. I swallowed hard. Jake inhaled deeply, like he was trying to steady himself, then leaned back against the couch. It's the way people look at you, he murmured. The way their eyes linger just a little too long, like they're trying to remember where they know you from. And when they do, when they realize, he let out a dry, humorless laugh. That moment right there, it never goes away. I could picture it now. The awkward hesitations, the wary glances, the quiet conversations that stopped whenever he walked into a room. I thought back to the friends he had lost, the job that had been taken from him, the way my parents had started treating him differently, even when they claimed they didn't. And the worst part? He was right. It didn't matter that he was innocent. The accusation had been enough to stain him. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. I got another job eventually. It wasn't as good as my old one, but whatever. I made it work. But you know what happened 6 months in? I shook my head. One of my coworkers found out. Some guy I barely even talked to. He heard about it through some friend of a friend. Started telling people. Jake clenched his fists. They all knew I wasn't charged with anything. They knew it was a mistake. But that didn't matter. I wasn't Jake anymore. I was that guy who got accused of some horrible shit, even if it wasn't true. My stomach twisted painfully. Did they fire you? He let out a bitter laugh. No, but they made sure I quit. He shook his head. You ever have people smile to your face but won't stand next to you in the break room? You ever have someone accidentally forget to invite you to a work event, then make up some bullshit excuse when you find out? I lowered my head, ashamed. I had to move, Adam. He continued, his voice quieter now. I couldn't even stay in my old apartment. My landlord didn't say it was because of what happened, but I could see it in his face. He wanted me gone. So I left. He started over. I finally looked up at him, my chest aching. Jake, I didn't know it was this bad. He scoffed. Of course you didn't. You got to go back to your normal life. You got to wake up every morning with your family still intact, still respected, still able to look people in the eye without wondering if they were silently judging you. I opened my mouth, but he wasn't done. You want to know why I never answered Lily's texts? Why I never read her letters? His voice wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Because every time I think about her, I don't see my niece. I don't see the kid I used to play video games with or take out for ice cream. I see the night my whole life fell apart. And I hate that, Adam. He let out a slow, shaky breath. I hate that I can't separate the two. I hate that every time I think about her, I remember the feeling of sitting in that damn holding cell, wondering if my life was over. I hate that I lost friends, lost opportunities, lost years of my life I can't get back. And I hate. His voice cracked slightly, and he looked away. I hate that I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at her without feeling all of that. Something deeply painful settled in my chest. I had spent 3 years trying to fix this, thinking that if I just said the right thing, if I just pushed hard enough, he would get over it. That he would come back. That he would see Lily, hug her, and tell her everything was okay. But now, sitting across from him, I realized the truth. This wasn't about grudges. Jake wasn't just holding on to anger out of spite. He was broken, and I had been too blind to see it. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my temples. So what now? I asked quietly. He looked down at his hands. I don't know. For the first time, his voice wasn't cold. It wasn't full of bitterness or resentment. It was just uncertain, and maybe, just maybe, that meant there was still a chance. Lily didn't know I was taking her to Jake's apartment. When she woke up that morning, her eyes were swollen from crying, her face pale, the exhaustion of the past few days settling deep into her bones. I could see it. The way she moved slower, the way she barely spoke, the way she just looked defeated. I wasn't going to let that be the end of this. So I told her we were going for a drive. I didn't tell her where. She didn't ask. She just climbed into the passenger seat, staring out the window, lost in her thoughts. It wasn't until we pulled into the parking lot of Jake's apartment complex that she stiffened. Her breath hitched. Dad? I turned off the engine. I talked to him last night. Her head whipped toward me, her eyes wide. What? You talked to him? What did he say? Did he? I held up a hand. He didn't promise anything. But I think he's finally willing to listen. She stared at me, her throat bobbing as she swallowed. Then, slowly, she reached in her hoodie pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I glanced at it. What's that? She turned it over in her hands, pressing her thumb against the crease. I started writing it a few months ago, she admitted. I never thought I'd actually get to give it to him. I gave her a reassuring nod. Then let's give it to him. Lily hesitated, gripping the paper so tightly her knuckles turned white. What if he doesn't take it? Then at least you tried, I said softly. But I think you owe it to yourself to try. She took a deep breath, exhaled shakily, then nodded. And together, we walked to his door. Jake took longer to answer this time. Lily shifted nervously beside me, glancing at the door like she was ready to bolt at any second. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the letter to her chest, her breathing uneven. Then, finally, the lock clicked. The door opened. Jake stood there, his expression unreadable. His gaze flickered from me to Lily, and for the first time in 3 years, their eyes met. Lily's breath hitched. Her entire body tensed, and I saw the way her lips trembled like she was about to break down right there on his doorstep. Jake didn't say anything. He just stared at her. She swallowed hard, gripping the letter even tighter. Uncle Jake, she whispered. He didn't respond. Her shoulders sagged slightly, but she pushed forward anyway. I know I don't deserve it, she continued, her voice small. But, please, just read this? She held out the letter, her hand shaking so badly I thought she might drop it. Jake stared at it for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. Lily let out a breath she had been holding for too long. Jake didn't open it. He just stared at it in his hands, his thumb running over the edge of the paper. Then, without a word, he nodded. And even though it wasn't an embrace, even though it wasn't a full reconciliation, even though there was still a long way to go, it was something. Lily didn't ask me if Jake had responded to her letter. After we left his apartment that day, she was quiet, more at peace than I had seen her in a long time, but still guarded, still afraid to hope for too much. She hadn't expected a miracle, and she didn't get one. But for the first time in 3 years, Jake had acknowledged her. He had taken her letter, and that alone was enough to give her something she hadn't had in a long time. Hope. But as the days passed and he didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up, I saw that hope start to flicker. She never said it out loud, but I saw it in the way she stared at her phone, checking her notifications even when she wasn't expecting anything. I saw it in the way she lingered near the front window sometimes, watching the driveway, like she was waiting for a car that would never come. And then, exactly 1 week later, he came. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. Sarah was in the kitchen, and Lily was upstairs in her room, probably scrolling through her phone like any other teenager. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened the door and saw Jake standing there, my breath caught. For a second, neither of us spoke. He looked different. Not just older, not just tired, but lighter. Like something inside him had shifted. Like some of the weight he had been carrying for so long had finally loosened its grip. He exhaled, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. Hey, I echoed, still stunned that he was even here. His gaze flickered past me, toward the stairs. Lily home? I nodded slowly. Yeah, she's upstairs. You wanted to get her? He hesitated. Then, finally, he nodded. I didn't question it. Didn't push. I just turned and called up the stairs. Lily, can you come down for a second? A muffled 1 SEC came from her room, followed by the sound of movement. A few seconds later, she appeared at the top of the stairs, her phone in her hand, looking mildly confused. She froze. She saw him. Her grip on her phone tightened, her lips parting slightly as she took in the sight of Jake standing in the doorway. For a long, agonizing moment, no one said anything. Then, Jake cleared his throat. "Happy birthday," he said. It was quiet, simple, but it might as well have been a thunderclap. Lily inhaled sharply, blinking rapidly, like she wasn't sure she had actually heard him right. Like she thought maybe she had imagined it. Then, suddenly, tears welled in her eyes. Not the kind of tears she had cried so many nights before. Not the kind filled with guilt, or grief, or heartbreak. These were different. She wiped at her face quickly, letting out a choked little laugh. You're late." Jake gave a small, almost sheepish nod. "Yeah, guess I am." She sniffled. "You didn't have to come." "I know," he admitted, "but I wanted to." Lily's breath hitched. And then, before she could stop herself, she took a step forward and hugged him. It wasn't careful. It wasn't hesitant. She just threw herself at him. Jake stiffened for a moment, caught off guard. His arms hovered slightly, uncertain. But then, slowly, they came down, wrapping around her in return. Lily buried her face in his shoulder, her body shaking. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Jake exhaled, his grip tightening slightly. "I know." She pulled back after a moment, wiping her tears with her sleeves. "Does this mean you forgive me?" Jake hesitated, but only for a second. Then he let out a breath. "Yeah, kid," he murmured. "It does." And just like that, after 3 years of silence, of distance, of pain, something shifted. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a full return to what they used to be. But it was a start, and sometimes a single step is enough to begin healing.